So not long ago, Carol and I were overseas, and we celebrated 30 years of marriage. And one of the places we went to in Greece was the Acropolis. Now, the Acropolis, let's see, I've got a slide there. I got it? Okay. So in Greece, when you get off the boat in Athens, you can't miss it. This is where the Parthenon is and all that. So we got on the subway and got off, and when we got off, I mean, you got to see where we are. This is not the normal way you go to the Acropolis, but we're tourists. We're not lost, but we don't know the area that well. The other side of the hill is how all the buses go. So, we meandered through some streets, and we got there, but we got there. Of course, we get up there, all these tour buses, the turnarounds, and crowds of people, and all that. And I say all that because in today's text, I want to teach from Psalm 16. And I know that some people think, that's Old Testament. I thought this was Easter, resurrection. How are we going to get to the cross, the empty tomb and all that, from where we're at? And let me just say that all roads lead to Jesus in the Old Testament. Now, the good news is this particular psalm was used by Peter and Paul when they wanted to talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So what better thing, perhaps, what better psalm to talk about than Psalm 16? Now, here's where we're going today. Have you ever listened in on conversations? Now, I know you shouldn't, but occasionally you'll be somewhere and you're listening to a conversation. You can just tell that things aren't going so well in somebody's life. Are you with me? And so I was having a cup of coffee with a guy this week, with a friend, and he was going on, and he was talking about how, man, it was just all bad at this particular thing. And then it was, anyway, I don't want to give you all that. I mean, then he said, he had changed gears, and his wife said something and all that. Okay, I got that. But what I'm saying is, see, that's so normal. So normal. And I think a lot of our conversations, even if we're just having them with ourselves, they're negative. And we're looking at what's wrong and what's not right and what's not measuring up to our expectations. And so we're thinking about what we don't have and what we're lacking and all that. Now, let me just, that's normal. I didn't say that's the way it should be. I just said it's normal. So let's go back to when Jesus died. And so after Jesus died and he rose from the grave, he meets three women, Mary, Salome, and another woman by the name of Mary, and some other women. They go tell Peter. And listen, you got to understand, nobody had ever come back to life. Ever. Are you with me? I mean, we got 2,000 years of history. It's kind of like, we got that. Jesus came, right? We got that at Easter. We got it. So, this had never happened. Well, so then, a little later on, Jesus goes for a walk. And he runs into two disciples, husband and a wife, and they're heading home. And Jesus kind of didn't make himself known to them. I mean, he could do that. So he's walking along and said, well, tell me, what's up? Because he was listening to their conversation. And here's what happened. Luke 24, verse 21. And they said, but we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it's now the third day since these things have happened. And so they were despondent. I mean, Jesus is listening in on their conversation. And here's the deal. They're like, Friday was a bad day. Now, see, once again, 2,000 years later, what do we call Friday? What do we call it? Good Friday. Were they calling it good? No. Listen, there are things today that you're calling bad. And one day, you're going to say, that was so good. All right, so what Jesus do? He kind of scolded them a little bit. I mean, you think, wow, he's a little rough on them. Here's what he says. He said, oh, foolish ones, slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Can you imagine for the next few hours, Jesus? Now, you know he could teach the Old Testament like nobody else. And if you'll read further in that passage sometime, they're like, man, didn't our hearts burn within us? That was incredible. But anyway, we don't have time to go there this morning. And so their focus is on the bad. And see, they thought that Jesus had abandoned them. And there are believers today walking around, feel like God has abandoned them. So I want to talk today about let hope in. We'll give you 3 words. You can remember these 3 words. So we'll get there, okay? But on the day of Pentecost, Peter quoted from Psalm 16, and he says, for David says concerning him, I saw the Lord always before me, for he's at my right hand, that I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad and my tongue rejoiced. My flesh also will dwell in hope. Now he's quoting Psalm 16, and we're going to get there in a few moments. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One see corruption. You've made known to me the paths of life. You will make me full of gladness with your presence. Verse 30, he says, being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him that he would set one of his descendants on his throne, he foresaw and spoke, get this, about the resurrection of the Christ. Peter, that's what he was talking about in Psalm 16. That he was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses. And Jesus now, that had it happened 50 days ago. Jesus had risen from the dead. But later on, the Apostle Paul, he's also preaching a message, and he too quotes from this passage. And he says, this is not a reference to David. For after David had done the will of God in his own generation, he died and was buried with his ancestors, and his body decayed. And you can go to Israel today and visit David's tomb. And guess what? If you dug it up, it would be a decayed body. It would be gone, decayed, right? Dust to dust. No, it was a reference to someone else. Someone whom God raised and whose body did not decay. Now, let me just say this. I can't prove this. But if Peter and Paul quoted Psalm 16, what do you think the chances are that Jesus taught Psalm 16 to those 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus? This was the text used after the resurrection. So let's just go on the assumption. Whether he did or not, I'm pretty sure he did. I thought it'd be a good time to talk about Psalm 16. And let's not forget that this psalm is also about a situation in David's life that was not the easiest to go through. So, let's dig into the text. Let's see what it means, and let's see how the resurrection of Jesus Christ applies to our life. Now, in David's life, if you're not familiar, when David was the king of Israel, but before he was the king, Saul was the king. But David was rising up rapidly in the eyes of the people. I mean, he killed Goliath, and, you know, you do something like that, that kind of puts you all right, kind of takes you from nobody to somebody overnight. And so David is now a somebody, and Saul was a little jealous, and Saul repeatedly tried to get rid of the competition, David. Tried to take his life. I mean, he was chasing him down and all that. So David had quite a few hair-raising incidents and a lot of stress. Wouldn't you if somebody's chasing you down? Yeah. So he writes this song. I don't know why, but trouble just has a way of showing up. You know? You ever have the wrong person show up at a party? I mean, that's like trouble, isn't it? That's what you say, trouble. We got trouble. Yeah. Trouble just shows up. And it's not always the person. And I would say that you could use a little hope. So where do you go when you need hope? David turned to the Lord. So as we go through this psalm, I want you to keep in mind that in the Psalms, we find those who feel at times alienated from God, overwhelmed by life, as well as incredible joy breaking through the clouds of despair. I think everybody's probably read or heard Psalm 23. It's popular at funerals. In other words, whatever your soul can experience, it's in the Psalms. Also keep in mind that in the New Testament there are 283 direct quotes from the Psalms. Now, if you're a statistician, there are 116 of those just from the Psalms, which is 41%. So where do we start? Quick example. So this past week, I needed my boy Adam. I needed his muscles for like an hour to move some heavy bookshelves. Now, he was not reluctant to help, but I'm a parent, and, you know, I have to still build my case. Are you with me? You should help me because. Correct? Do y'all do that? Okay. So he helped me. But I just reminded him that I had done something for him that took about an hour. So it was kind of an even trade-off. Anyway, I just thought I'd build my case. All right. Now, here's the good news. Wow. So let's go to point number one. But before I give you the word, don't flash it. Not yet. Don't put the slide up yet. Let's read the text. Because now you're ready, right? Because now despair has set in, anxiety has set in, you feel abandoned, and you need hope, so you go to the Lord, and you got to build a case. Do you know? So let's do it. That's what the psalmist did. Let me just say this. If the psalmist does it, you can do it. That's why God had it put in the Bible. You say, I really don't know how to pray. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to help you how to pray a little better right now. Here it is. Here it is. Psalm 16:1. Preserve me, O God. Now, see the next word? For. Because. Now listen, here's the interesting thing. That's the only thing David asked for. Preservation. Safety. That's all he asked for. And then guess what he does? Immediately, he builds his case. Y'all try this sometime. The psalmist did. Just telling you. Okay, so, look. Y'all have done this when you were a parent. Remember? Oh, but I cleaned my room. I took the trash out when Mom told me to. Surely I can go to this party, right? Didn't you build your case? Sure you did. All right. God is our Father. You can build a case. And that's what the psalmist does. In you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. In other words, you're my master. You're my boss. And I have no good apart from you. So David is saying, look, tell you why you ought to answer my prayer, God. I've sought refuge in you. I didn't go elsewhere. I think you ought to answer my prayer. I think you need to preserve me. I think you need to help me. I mean, I'm devoted to you. I take great delight in you. Now, let me just ask you, so how are we doing? You know what I mean? How are we doing? I mean, can you build your case by telling God that you are so devoted to him that, you know, he should perhaps answer your prayer? Well, he gave me something better. Verse number 3. As for the saints, in the land. You're like, where did he get this next line? They are the excellent ones. Now, okay. Saints don't always act like saints, do they? Your kids don't always act like your kids. See, they do, but you wouldn't admit that, right? In fact, we even go so far as say you're like your mother. You're your mother's child. Whoa, 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 what about me? Or you're your dad's. I mean, you see what I'm saying? So I know, saints are not, but now this is fascinating. This is fascinating. In whom is all my delight. So here's the word, loyalty. Loyalty. You want to let hope in? How's your loyalty to God and your loyalty to the local church and the body of believers? So I'm just, right? I mean, I'm just telling you, this is how the psalmist built his case. All right? So you got to ask this far. So how's your case going so far? I mean, if you were in a court of law, somebody might come out after the first day and say, well, how did it go? How did your case go? Right? I mean, people are always asking stuff like that. Hey, listen, we all have our own meltdown moments, do we not? I mean, I've given people plenty of reason not to hang around me. I've even given my wife reasons not to hang around me. Huh? So don't act like you're this great saint and you're not going to church because they act like this. Listen, God's not done with anybody yet. All right? So let's just cool our heels a little bit. But I got to ask myself, how's my case? Colossians 1:4 says, we've heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and your love for all God's people. You cannot separate the two. Now, I know culturally you'll hear things like, well, you know, religion's more private and I kind of do my own thing. Okay, I'm talking about biblical Christianity, biblical faith that comes right out of the Bible. All right? I'm not talking about something you made up and you thought of and all that. This is our final authority right here. So love for God and love for God's people found in the local church, that's just Bible. That's just what happened. If you read the New Testament, where are the letters written to? Churches. Church at Philippi, church at Thessalonica, church in Colossae. I mean, that's just where they're written to. That's where they expected to find the believers. All right, verse 4. The sorrows of those who run after, oh, this is interesting, another God. Okay, fine. Throw God by the wayside and throw the church by the wayside. Chase something else. The sorrows shall multiply. They drink offerings of blood. I will not pour out or take their names on my lips. Now, just notice the word sorrows. People outside the faith, not loyal to God, the church, etc., generally speaking, have more emotional pain. I'm not saying believers have none. Let's just put that aside. David is obviously in a tough situation of some sort. But there's anxiety and dissatisfaction. Listen, when you choose to worship something besides God or someone, and you know, this is interesting. Most people are unaware of their choices. David Foster Wallace, not a believer of any kind, not religious, he spoke at Kenyon College, and I think after this week everybody knows where Kenya is, all right, but whatever. So he spoke, and this was actually, you know, here was a speech. It's well known. And here's what he said. Here's what he said. And you'll know it's true. Here it is. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. Here's what he says. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning for life, you'll never have enough. And you'll never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. Worship power, and you'll end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb your own feel. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, and you'll end up feeling stupid. You see, that's what the psalmist said. The psalmist said, if I wasn't loyal to you, there would be more sorrows in my life. That's the same thing. David Foster Wallace told some college people. Now, he was not a religious person, but he understands worship. Idol worship comes at a high price. So all I'm asking on point number one, loyalty, how will you strengthen your appeal? How are you going to build your case? Loyalty is a good reason for God to answer your prayer. That's it. But let's go to number two. And I'll give you the word. Exuberance. Exuberance. In other words, you are just exhilarated over God's blessings and His goodness. Listen. God's goodness, I don't know. It's like we've put it on the back shelf somewhere and we can't seem to find it. We don't know where we put it. And it's right there in front of us. So here now the psalmist is going to reflect on God's goodness, and it causes him to break out in praise. So here we go, verse 5. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. I mean, here's what I know. You know, sometimes our daily bread, the necessities of life, and that's all fine and good. But it's hard for us to admit that it's not enough. If we have God, we still want more. Contentment is just an elusive character trait. And he says, you hold my lot. I just want you to remember that Jesus didn't have anything. He didn't have a place to lay his head. He didn't own any worldly stuff to speak of. He didn't. He says in verse 6, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance. Okay. I don't have time to drill down on this, but listen, in the Old Testament, and a lot of this language is found in earlier books in the Old Testament, and when Israel went into the land, they would get, you know, the tribes were getting land, and God gave them a portion and this portion. And you know what the Levites got? The Levites didn't get any of that. Okay, this was the priestly tribe, and they were going to be the priests, the pastors, you know, the preachers or whatever. Okay, this is like the religious. Okay. So they didn't get land. They got God. You're like, oh, wow. I'd have hated to have been them. All they got was God. And the psalmist says, God, if all I have is you, I can't stand it. That is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And he breaks out into praise. I mean, that's what he does. Verse 7, so I bless the Lord. I just bless the Lord, who gives me counsel, direction, correction, instruction, and all that. And in the night also my heart instructs me. Wow. So I'm telling you that exuberance, contentment, is the second key to letting hope in. Because if you sit around and focus on what you don't have and what you lack, and you focus on your discontentment, how is hope going to get in the door? It's not. It's not. So it might be that you'll have to go home and there's an old hymn, and here's what it said. Count your many blessings, name them one by one. So go home, write down 25 things that you are just, wow. It'll help. It'll help. But I know this, as long as discontentment is active, hope will be elusive. It just will. So let's go to the third key. This is the word trust. Trust. This is hard to teach. So let's just go back to Psalm 16. The apostles Peter and Paul quoted it. He says, I have set the Lord always before me, and he is at my right hand. Now, when you read that, you got to think about the historical situation and all that. Now, I'm left-handed, but most people are right-handed. So if you're right-handed, you put the sword in your right hand. Are you with me? And you hold the shield with your left hand. So this side is vulnerable, is it not? To the enemy. Right? And what's the psalmist say? But God, you're at my right hand. Wow. That's pretty cool. So I'm not going to be shaken. My confidence goes up. Therefore, verse 9, my heart is glad and my whole being rejoices. Now I'm telling you, this is healthy. No wonder he says, my heart rejoices. My whole being. Okay, because when you are anxious and stressed out, doesn't it affect your whole being, your mood, your body, your thought life? Doesn't it? Affects your whole being. Now, I know this. Listen, doctors will tell you it can affect weight gain, your autoimmune system and all that, and chronic exhaustion, sleep disorders and all that. And we could probably list another dozen. Wow. Do you see how huge trust is? Confidence? That God has not abandoned you? It says, my flesh also dwells secure. Verse 10, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. God is not going to abandon you at the moment of your greatest need, which is death. Your relationship with God goes well beyond the grave because God is greater than death. And if you think about that for a moment, I know we're just getting started in baseball season. Now here's how, if you don't watch baseball, here's what happens. Let's say you got two teams, they're in a close game. The one pitcher, everybody's starting to hit him really well, so they bring in what they call is a reliever. So they look out into the bullpen at their other pitchers, and they try to size up, who should we bring in now? Who should we bring in now? And you try to pick the pitcher who you think is going to be greater than the hitter he has to face. Are you with me? If it's football, you try to draw up a play, and it'll be greater. The offense will be greater than the defense on that particular play. You go through life. You do the same thing, okay? God is greater than death. Listen, at the end of the day, what really? If you could take care of the death issue, wouldn't the rest kind of be like non-essential? Because I think there's a pretty good chance we're all going to tap out at some age. You know what I mean? It could be 98, it could be 100. You might be like my grandmother at 98 and a half, and she said, why would I want to live to 100? And she was still in pretty good health. So at some point, you're going to want to kind of go anyway. You know what I'm saying? Probably not today, but yeah. But listen, that's really what Easter is about. That God will not abandon you at the moment of your greatest need, which is death. Now, how do you think that stacks up with the situation that David's in right now? Well, God, you kind of took care of the big boy, death. I guess you could handle this. And his confidence is just shooting through the air and all kinds of trust. Boy, And when Jesus died 3 days later, he was resurrected to prove that his sacrifice on the cross was sufficient. And God stamped our sin debt is paid in full. And that's why you know he won't abandon you if you've committed your life to him. Verse 11, you make known to me the path of life. In your presence there's fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forever. See, the psalmist is confident by this point. You remember he started off, God, I'm not in the best situation. I want you to preserve me. And here's why. And he builds his case with loyalty. And if you've never committed your life to Jesus Christ, you could do that today. Just tell God, admit that you're a sinner and that you want to receive Christ as your Savior. And say, I'm committing my life to you. There are no exact words, no fancy words. You just do it. And if you perhaps maybe over the last 2 years, 5 years, the local church, body of believers has not been that important, renew your commitment. Renew it. Build your case for God. And then I want you to spend time focusing on God's goodness. Because in Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, listen, here's what I know. Everybody in here. Paul said, I'm sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. The resurrection gives us the confidence that God is not finished with us, and he wants to take our lives and bring them to a final conclusion. But the grave is not the end. Well, you say, well, you know, I've committed my life to Christ, and I'm committed to the church, so now what do I do? Well, great. I mean, I'd say, have you ever used your loyalty to build your case when you go to pray? I'm not saying you say, oh, God, I deserve this. Say, God, you know, I'm in a pickle right now. And like the psalmist, and that's fine. You need to learn to pray what the psalmist prayed. Like the psalmist, I too have been committed to you. Like the psalmist, I've been committed to your saints, your believers. And I'm asking you for protection, for help. And you can focus on the goodness of God and get out your sheet of paper and write down 25 things that you're thankful for. And you know what? Some of these commitments can be hard. Don't you wish all commitments were easy? Like eating ice cream every day? I got that one down. I could do ice cream twice a day. I have no problem with that. With whipped cream, of course. Boy, spiritual commitments. Nothing in our culture will reinforce your commitments. I was spending time with a guy this week, and we were just talking about, before everything, and not, he was just saying, oh, well, the crowd I was with and the guys, we just didn't do church. I get that. So some of you are going to have to dig down a little deeper, and it's going to be a little harder to renew some commitments. Now, here's the deal. I can't promise you hope if you won't let hope in the door through loyalty, exuberance, and confidence, just like the psalmist. Let's stand for prayer, shall we?